My name is Glynn and welcome to Role-Playing Cartography. Hello, it's Glynn again, and if you remember from episode 3 we've got the village map that we inked out. I'm going to add some colour to it now. So let's try and get started. So the first thing that I'll do, because this isn't going to stay as an inkwork piece, it's now going to be a colour piece. I'm going to switch off the fill of the river and the woods. The shade layer that I've got here, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to duplicate that layer and I'm going to place it up here and I'm going to call it shadow. If you go back to episode 2, you'll see where I created a shadows and a highlight layer. I'm basically going to do the same thing, but I'm reusing this layer where we added the shadows, and I'm just going to make it basically exactly as I would set that up. So I'm just setting that to multiply, and whatever we put down underneath, the shadow will go down on top of that. I may as well create the highlight layer while I'm here. Overlay. Okay, so that's those two sorted out for when we need them, and I'm reasonably happy with that. I'll switch these off, so that's all switched off. And we'll also switch off the fills for the building, and we'll actually go through and add a little bit of roof detail. That will become important later, so I'll do that on this additional ink layer so I can switch it on and off if I need to. And then we'll just go through and add in some roof lines. Just do this quite rough. It doesn't really matter for it to be totally accurate. One thing we haven't done here as well is we've not added chimney stacks on. I mean, that level of detail you can add on easily enough. Just stick them on the end, maybe like that. But for this sample, we won't bother with that. And thinking about roof lines, you can come up with lots of different setups from the outline that you've got. So this one we could have that as a separate lower floor, and then this could be a two-story building like that, or we could make it so it's got a central apex. Yeah, we'll leave that one like that. Most of these buildings, they're going to be simple things. This would be a stable, and we'll something like that for that one. You don't want to make things too complicated for yourself here, so generally So I think we've captured all of the roof lines there, so that's looking good. Okay, We'll start adding the underlying colours again now. I'll start by doing that from underneath on this layer. So this will be the ground. Generally speaking, it's going to be a kind of green colour, not too dark, maybe something around there, and we'll add that. Oh, we've got one there. No, we'll go lighter. So we'll create one there, and then we'll paint the whole of this. And this is just our kind of base layer of colour. You can see that the shadows are still multiplied down on top of it, so it's still there. What I'll do, I'll just using this brush that I've got, I'm going to add in some variations of colour as well, and it's the variations of colour that really help stuff along. We'll also go for a lighter, maybe a bit more exposed dirt where the grass has worn away. Maybe go even a little bit darker in a couple of places. Okay. What I'll do now, I'll just kind of blend all of that in, just so there's no really obvious points where the colour is changing. And what we'll do now is we'll add another layer called the ground texture. It's very similar to what we did with the floor and the walls in episode 2. Ground texture, ground floor. So in a similar way, we're going to use this whatever your favourite texture brush becomes. We'll select the general colour. We'll come a little bit darker, and we'll come a little bit lighter. We'll maybe add a bit of dirt in, so we'll add some brown in here. Probably a little bit too much maybe. Brush is a bit big, so I'm going to just dial that back. Come back with a smaller brush. Be a little bit more deliberate, maybe around where there's the farm, fields, things like that. Okay, you can also play with your blend modes on textures when they're on a separate layer. So we could change it to a soft light or a vivid light. A bit too much for me really. Just a tint darkens it up, and colour burning, linear burning. Some things work better than others. So, but for the moment I'm reasonably happy with that. So the next thing we're going to do is add in the river. So I'm going to choose a kind of tealy colour. And then we'll, like we did on the ink map for this, where we filled it with grey, we'll just take out the overlap. Okay, and we'll do the same thing with the rivers. We'll add a little bit of texture into it, just to give it because we don't want the texture to overlap onto the to the grass. We're just going to control select the river layer just so it keeps it defined, and then just add that in, and again we go a little step darker. There we go. Autosave. So next step is the woods. So we'll fill this. Now if I just use the paint bucket, we'll select, I'm using the Alt key and just pipette picking a green, or I can use this green that I've already got here. If I just try and fill that, you'll see that the current layer is not selected. The current layer is woods, so I don't want to select that because that layer has no boundaries at the moment. There's no content in it, so I wouldn't want that ticked. If I untick that, it means it will use everything else as a boundary, and that means that it will pick up some of this texture in the colouring here, so you don't get all of the fill correctly. So the best thing to do is to actually just switch off this texture and this ground here, and then fill it from there. You can see where we get that slightly annoying feature of ArtRage, where that happens. So my plan here is to select the ink layer. Currently we're just using the ink layer, so it doesn't try and find any of this shading that we've got, and I'll use the magic select tool, set to current layer, ink work, do that, then we'll invert it, select the woods layer, go for the paint bucket, make sure we've got the green done. Our selection's active and we're only on this woods layer at the moment. Wrong way around, obviously. Invert the selection, paint bucket tool, woods layer, there we go. So what you can see has happened there is I don't have the ability to switch off the inner detailing of the wood. So I get this issue up and around those lines as well. So because we've already got the selection made, I can just switch off the ink layer. I could also switch off the shading layer. I'll just switch it to current layer only. That way there's nothing on the current layer, and the woods is the only layer that I'm on. There's nothing there, so I can just fill up to the selection. So that's kind of the laborious explanation and the way around it. So we'll switch our ink layer back on, drop our selection. Now you do, as we did before, you still get this slight follow through or this lack of anti-aliasing on these edges. We could take it into Photoshop, we could shrink it ever so slightly just to get rid of them. So we'd export that woods layer. It's probably, when you see this on top of the textures, it's not that noticeable, so I generally won't tend to do that. So that's looking pretty good. We can add some woods texture. just select the woods layer so we don't get that spill. We'll use this tool, we'll select that, we'll go a little bit lighter. And then we'll go a little bit darker. We're just adding that little bit of variation in, which just makes things pop a little. Okay. Next thing, we could add the building colours on. So we'll call this buildings. Now you can be really boring here and just select one roof tile, roof shingle colour and do all the buildings the same. That makes a reasonable amount of sense, because if you think about a village, it's using the natural resources around it to construct buildings. It's not like nowadays where, you know, materials imported from all around the world to build your roof structures and stuff. So it's, you know, reasonable to have them all the same colour. A little trick that we'll try here is we'll use this ink layer, the selection on the ink layer, current layer only, so we're not worrying about all the other colour, we're just focusing on what's on the ink layer. And we'll create a selection, we'll invert it, then we'll switch to the buildings layer only, and then we're going to pick a building tile colour, something natural. So we'll go with this, and then one of the things that will actually be happening here is it will be filling, as you can see. As you can see here, we get that overlay, which is a bit annoying. We can tidy that up after. At this kind of resolution, you don't really notice the lack of anti-aliasing on the building. But the other thing we can do is, rather than use that approach, we're on the buildings layer, we've got the external edges of the building selected. We could just use the paintbrush tool, and then we could just drop those on, and that way we don't get so much this effect here. I mean, it's just because the selections run over onto that one. But we'll use this approach, just it speeds things up. I'm just going to go to each building and okay, that's all the build. No, two more there. Okay. Let's drop the clear the selection. Now what we can do, we could control and click the buildings now, which we filled with the brown, and we could add a little bit of variation to a couple. I'm going to use an ink pen because it goes over the top better. So we could say, well, that one and that one and that one and that one and that one are going to be slightly different. We'll go for a darker colour on that one. And that one, and then we'll switch to a different colour here for the barn, for the stables. See, adding this bit of variation in makes it slightly more interesting visual. Okay, let's clear that. Now the next thing is the pathways and the roadways that we've indicated. So I'm going to create a layer, and I'm going to put this underneath some of the other colour, pretty much directly on top of the ground texture layer. And that's because I want at this point here for it to go under the river slightly. I'll show you what I mean. This is going to be pathways, we'll call it. And we'll use a kind of, not mud. I don't want to use mud so much, muddy colour. We'll go with something quite light. Let's use that colour. We use this brush, but we use it very small. Autosave. So we'll use this brush, make it a bit smaller, and then on this pathways layer, I'm just going to do a quick save. There we go. So if this is just rough, but if it runs off underneath the building, because we're under the colour layer for the building, it doesn't matter so much because you don't see it. And we can add some of this into the areas of the farms, fields. Oops. And what we'll probably do actually, just so that we can see if that's running under there, we could multiply the river down. Well, let's try and lighten it. Yeah, we'll leave it like that. Just wanted to see if I could expose more of the pathway beneath, and the next step will probably really help to do that. I'm just adding some dry ground, sand, bank to the edges of the river. Okay. Now there's a little trick I'm going to use here. I'm just going to save just in case PC doesn't like it, because that happens. We're going to add some layer effects. Remember, with the layer effects, if you're creating something that's got like a light and a shadow effect, or an embossing or a beveling or something like that, that it follows the rest of the rules that you've already established, which is the light is coming from this direction, so it's casting shadows this way. Okay, so we'll use something called cutout, and we'll reduce that right down, probably even less than that. The offset will keep relatively low as well. And instead of multiply, now we'll leave it multiply. So you can see, I'm probably going to need to just accept that. Zoom in more on this. So you can see you've got this rough detail now, which really adds to that sense that there's wear in the ground. Now you'll see as I move the light direction around that I want to keep the shade this side. So you can see down here where the light would be coming from this direction and the shade is on the lower path because the path's eroded away. Just change that to a 1. The more you offset it, the more exaggerated the effect will be. I'm pretty happy actually with that. No, we'll just leave that as multiplied. So yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, next thing. Excuse me. This is where we've already added some of our shadows to the tree lines and cast shadows of the buildings, but we haven't added the shadows to the slopes of the roofs that are away from the light. And that really adds to what's going on here. So we're just going to go to each building and where where that shadow would be. We're just going to reinforce it. Hello, Glynn from Monkey Blood Design here. This is the point in the video where I remind you to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, share and comment. Thank you. Okay, so we've added all of the shade layers to the roof slopes, and we're going to do basically the opposite for the highlights. So the areas of the roof that we haven't shaded will now get a nice highlight. Technically, if it was a flat roof, you could just leave it as it is. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So we still need to add some highlights now to the wooded regions, and that just makes those pop a little bit more. And the side of the hill as well. We'll give that a little bit of attention there. And then we'll do the banks of the rivers. I'm just going to blend this in. I'll probably have to revisit anything that I kind of go over accidentally, like on the woods. I'm happy with that. Okay, let's just sort the bank of the river out. This will just give the suggestion that the land rolls down into the river slightly. We could reinforce that with some shadow actually on this top side. You can see it's looking like the river dips down into the ground, but obviously not where the ford is. Okay, the only other thing that we could do is add some texture to the building roofs. Call this building texture, and we'll just control click the buildings layer so again we don't overrun. And we could choose a different brush to kind of make the roofs look a little bit more like a roof in terms of tiling. Let's see what brush textures we might want to go with. So we want something, I've just got to find it. So this sort of thing, it's a square canvas, and you can see if let's go with a darker colour. See, just gives like the suggestion of roof tiling. We could just make that a bit smaller. It's possibly a little bit big in terms of a brush. Actually, I don't think the brush size matters. I think the texture's fixed. So let's see if we can use one with that's it. That one's a bit more. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so, and I'm not being too crazy with this. Again, they're just hints at a slightly different texture on the roof. As if you try and follow the direction of the roof, it adds to the effect. And once we've got this colour on, or this texture on, we can have a little bit of a play about with. Is that actually going down on that? Yeah, looks like it is. It's just very similar colour. I mean, if anything, so far in the colouring episodes of what I'm doing, you'll see how just that simple application of texture and highlights and shadows will elevate, a simple flat colour map into something that's, you know, like really engaging, especially if you've got it on VTT screen in front of your players, and you know they'll feel more connected to it. So we'll just deselect that and then see how adjusting the blend modes has an effect on the look. Yeah, actually I prefer that softer look. So I think we can say that the village of Bellford is now ready for action. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you found something useful. Why not consider supporting what I do here by heading over to the Monkey Blood web store at www.monkeyblooddesign.co.uk. Check out handy maps, handy A5 size maps that you can use as game inspiration. There's towns and villages, buildings and structures, and dungeons, caves and strange locales, and you can use these within your game as inspiration, populate them for your players to explore and pillage. Enjoy. Thank you.